All right, are we on?
I think we're on.
All right. Awesome. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm really happy that you all could make it here, especially on this beautiful Saturday afternoon when it's tough to be inside, I think, with all the sunshine. I'm Lucie Hayward, and I brought my friend Mark Bronner along with me today, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about cyber incident response planning, and we're also going to talk through, we'll probably share some examples of some things that we've worked on, especially recently, and and then open it up for any questions. So we go through this. If you have any questions, please feel free to jump in and just ask, and we'll do our best to answer them. Well, I'll let Mark introduce himself first, since he's first on the list.
All right, so I'm Mark Bronner. About 20 years in IT, 16 years in security, about 7 years spent running an incident response team for a Fortune 200 company, about 50,000 users all over the world. I'm a Lipscomb grad, so, well, gosh, 20 years ago, I guess, was here and got my computer science degree and did a little hacking and splunking around. And I guess at that time, the first thing that I bumped into here was we tapped into the intercom system in the dormitory so we could make announcements, order pizza, open up the dorm, do some things without anybody knowing where it was coming from. So that was a lot of fun. But so today, I'm part of our Kroll cybersecurity practice. We do incident response, forensics, and investigations all over the world, along with Lucie and others on our team. And we're based here in Nashville, so we're local and happy to be here today.
Yeah. I'm Lucie Hayward. I also work for Kroll with Mark. I've got about 15 years of security and project management experience. My claim to fame is I worked for Target for about 11 years, and I spent a good part of that in the information security department, but I left well before the breach happened or even started, so I had nothing to do with it. But I ended up here in Tennessee because of my husband's job, and I've been with Kroll now for about 6 years. My background is security, but I also have a background in project management, so that's the type of work that I do for the team. I help out on large-scale data breaches as a project manager, and I also help our clients with what we're talking about today, with building out their cyber incident response plans and testing them through tabletop exercises. I'm also president of the PMI Nashville chapter. This is my second year as chapter president. And I know from planning our annual symposium what a lot of effort goes into putting on these types of events. So I think they've done a great job here. And please make sure to thank all the volunteers who are giving up their time to put together this event so we can all learn CPEs and PDUs and network and have fun and learn something. So who here has an incident response plan at your organization? A couple people? Okay. Who's familiar with it? Okay. Who's had to use it? Maybe. So one of the things that we do with our clients is we come in and help them build out an incident response plan, and we have seen quite a wide variety of different plans. We work with companies that have nothing because they just haven't felt that they needed it or they didn't know where to start. We work with companies that have very detailed plans, and in some cases they're a little too detailed. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through it. But really an incident response plan, I love using the NIST definitions. They're just the instructions and procedures that an organization can use to identify, respond to, and mitigate the effects of a cyber incident. And we're going to spend some time talking about the identification piece, because I think that's really the most important part, is being able to identify and know when you have an incident so that you can invoke your plan, get your team together, and start responding and mitigating. What it's not is it's not a checklist, it's not a prescriptive list of things to do. We find that a lot of companies want us to help them put together a little checklist where they can tick things off. And, Mark can certainly tell you with everything he's worked with, the cases that I've been involved in, everything is different. Especially the things we're seeing now is not what we saw a year ago, and I'm sure we're going to start getting calls in 6 months for stuff that's completely different than what's out there now. So if you have that checklist, it really puts you in the position of you run the risk of not being able to do things that are on your checklist because they don't apply to your incident, and then that can be used against you later. So if your plan says you're going to do A, B, C, and D, and then you find out during the course of your investigation that, well, a couple of those steps really don't apply here and you don't do them, that can come back and haunt you later, especially if your breach becomes public, if there's litigation, etc. One of the most detailed incident response plans I saw was down to like what they were going to do every 15 minutes. And, you know, as a project manager, part of me likes that because I mean, I like lists, and so I want to put a list together for everything. But, you know, they were saying like in 15 minutes, we're going to get together a conference bridge, and these 10 people are going to join, and 30 minutes, we're going to have this meeting, and then 45 minutes, we're going to have that meeting. And it's like, well, you know what? What if you miss that first 15-minute window? And what if this goes into litigation? And they come back and say, well, you said you were going to do this if you experienced an incident, and you didn't. I mean, it sounds kind of silly, but those things can happen if you aren't careful. So some key questions that we're going to talk through. First of all, why is it important to define an incident? Does anybody know? Yep, exactly. It's important that you have a definition, and the definition varies for every organization based on your industry, based on the type of data that you have, based on what your business is. But it's really important that you understand, because otherwise everything could be an incident, right? And everything's not an incident. So you need to determine how you're going to define an incident, how you're going to define an event, and how you're going to define a breach. And what's the difference between them? And Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about why we should care?
Why you should care, yeah. Yeah, we'll get into this a little bit. But those words, and particularly things like breach, incident, event, can really be triggers. Increasingly, when you have lawyers involved, you have regulatory considerations involved, and those words have meaning. So if you're in IT and you're just going around like, oh my gosh, we've got a breach, like, wait a minute. You put that in an email, that can come back and haunt you later on if you truly have an incident. So we'll get into that a little bit, some of the important distinctions.
Yeah, and we work with, there's a law firm that we do a lot of these incident response plans with to protect privilege, and there's an attorney that we work with who, he's like, don't ever use the word breach. Even if you have one, don't use the word breach. It's just got such a bad connotation. People hear the word breach and they immediately assume that you're in trouble, that you've got problems, and it's just not good. A resume generating. An RGE. I'm going to have to remember that. That's good. So the NIST definition of an incident says a computer security incident is a violation or imminent threat of violation of computer security policies, acceptable use policies, or standard security practices. And I think this is a good starting point, but what do you think it's missing? If you put this in your plan, what are you at risk of? I'm sorry? Too often. Everything's an incident, right? If you've got an employee who's using his work computer to do some online gambling, that's probably a violation of your acceptable use policy, right? But it's not an incident. You're not going to investigate it. You're just going to maybe tell him not to do it anymore or give him a warning. Yeah. If we use this definition, we'd always be in incident response mode. We all have users. So what we work with our clients to come up with what their definition of an incident is. We see if you see down here, Mark. Yes. So we recommend that you consider appending it with something like this, that it has the significant potential to lead to the following: either a negative impact to your reputation, inappropriate access to PII or PHI or customer data, or loss of IP or funds. And it really depends on what's important to you. We tell our clients, what would be your worst nightmare, right? Don't worry about how they got into your network. Just assume somebody's in your network and they have access to something. What would be the most traumatic thing that you could think of? And for some companies, it's, getting hold of their intellectual property if they have a proprietary tool or product. For some companies, healthcare, PHI, if somebody got access to that, that could be bad. Your company's reputation. Think about Target. I mean, they suffered some financial losses, but they're certainly not going to go out of business anytime soon, right? But it took a hit to their reputation by what happened. So you really need to think about, and some of our clients will put a list of all of these. If it has the potential to lead to any of these things, we're going to consider it an incident. So, you want to add to that? No? Okay. Does anybody have any questions so far? No? Okay. So, an event. Again, NIST definition says an event is any observable occurrence in a system or network, right? So you see some malware on somebody's computer, that's not really an incident. It's an event, right? And then we have adverse events, which has a negative consequence, system crash, packet flood, unauthorized use of privileges, unauthorized access to data, execution of malware that destroys data. So this is probably a little bit more serious than your average event, but is it an incident yet? And I'll let Mark talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, I think, so during my time when I was in enterprise IR, one of the things that we ran into frequently was we had operational side of IT that used the term incident, right? Computer incident, that could be an outage. It could be, issue with an application, lots of things to generate incidents. And so there was an entire plan that was about 100 pages just about how we respond to computer incidents. But it really had nothing to do with security-related incidents. And sometimes we would piggyback off that language as it related to security. One of the challenges was, okay, how do we plug into that? Because at some point, they may be investigating an incident, and then that incident may change because we now think that there's a security-related component to that issue. And so if you have plans like that, if you have folks, I think they were using ITIL, things like that, as part of that language, they use some of this terminology, but it may be different than what you consider being relevant from a security standpoint. So you want to make sure your plans are complementary or that there's trigger points for when you might actually invoke a security incident.
Yeah, and also make sure, this is why it's important to have that definition established of an event versus an incident. I was just with a client this last week doing a tabletop exercise, and they call every event, they refer to it as an incident. That's like their cultural language, it's in all their documentation. So for them to try and change it, they acknowledge it will be very difficult. They also see the problem with calling everything an incident. And so we've had worked with a couple of organizations like that, and we recommend that they establish a separate word such as crisis to refer to an actual incident. However, the industry standard language is generally referred to it as an incident versus an event. Okay, I think we've talked about this a little bit, being careful about using the B word, especially when you're sending out emails internally, when you're conducting an investigation. So breach generally occurs when you've lost control of certain types of sensitive data. And, people like to throw the word breach around. We've been breached, we've been hacked, somebody's in our network. You need to just be careful about how you're referring to things, especially in writing. Also, talk to counsel. As soon as you suspect that you may have an investigation or an incident. Yes?
This is dead on, which is, we've defined in our organization that the B word is to never be used. We've actually trained people. That is an unacceptable word in this organization. And there's only one place that can declare breach, and that's counsel. Nobody in IT or other parts of the industry declare breach. Only counsel can declare breach.
That's very good. That's very good. I've never heard of a company being that strict about the use of the word breach. So I think that's great that you are. And
it's a legal construct.
Yeah.
Breach is not a technical event.
No.
It's a legal construct.
Yep, absolutely. And I think having counsel be the one to declare that you've got an incident or a breach, I think that's great. And that's one of the things we'll talk about in a little bit. We'll go through a process flow of an incident. And we always recommend that you have, and it varies by organization, but we always recommend that you have that one person who has that authority, and only that person can declare an incident. So when building out your incident response plan, there's a number of components that you need to have in your plan. First you want to have your incident definition, and you need to figure out what makes sense for your organization. It should clearly state who's got that authority. A lot of times it's counsel, sometimes it's a CISO, sometimes it's a CIO or a senior IT exec. We tend to work with a lot of medium-sized companies because they're the ones who generally need the most help. Most larger organizations have their own incident response team or incident response department. So sometimes a more medium-sized organization doesn't have a CIO or a CISO, but you just need to establish who that is. You need to understand that declaring an incident invokes the plan, and it convenes the incident response team. Your definition may be different than NIST. We like it as a starting point, so I think it helps you focus on what you need to think about. And then again, be careful when using the word breach.
Slides will be available, right?
Yes. Yep. And I don't know if everybody can see this. I should have brought up my cat toy, laser pointer. So when we work with our customers, we help them put together some form of this incident response process flow. It varies based on your company and your structure, but it generally works. So if you go at the very far bottom there on the left, you'll see number one, there's a couple different ways an incident can start out, and it always starts out as an event, right? So you might have the end user who calls the help desk because they've got a problem with their computer, so they call and they report it. Up at the top, you might have a system alerts generated, and it goes to the information security team, and they review it and triage it. Or you might get a call from law enforcement. Has anybody ever gotten that call? Has the FBI ever called? Local share, yeah. You might get a phone call from law enforcement. You may also hear from a third-party vendor if you work with somebody who has a software that's been breached and they feel that it may impact your company. But all three of those will eventually flow up to the incident response team lead, who is usually the CISO, senior manager in information security, CIO, and that person will conduct an initial investigation. So sometimes it's pretty obvious that you've got something going on based on an alert or the FBI calls. Sometimes you need to do a little bit more investigating. You need to pull up some logs. This is what he does, so.
Deeper analysis,
yes,
yeah.
The deeper analysis.
We'll talk about that in some later slides.
And then you need to determine, does it meet our definition? So, is it an incident? And if it's not, then you resolve the event and you go on your merry way. If it is, then you declare an incident and you convene the incident response team. And then you conduct your investigation. So over here we've got a number of incident response team activities. So depending on what you have going on, you may need to notify law enforcement that you've got an incident. There may be regulatory agencies that you need to notify. You may need to notify your insurance carrier. How many of you have a cyber insurance policy that you know of? You can't get one. There's a story there, isn't there? You need to notify your insurance carrier, and we recommend that whoever in your organization handles your insurance policy be on that team, because they'll know the ins and outs of your policies, they'll know who needs to be notified at your carrier, when, all that good stuff. You may need to bring in third-party forensics, so you may need to call Kroll or somebody else to help you out. We generally recommend that you bring in third-party, the 3 C's: capability, capacity, and conflict. So does your team have the capability to conduct the investigation? You may or may not, depending on what resources you have. Do you have the capacity? I mean, everybody has their day jobs, right? So if something like this comes up, you've got to pull people off their day jobs, and are you able to do that? If you're at your busy time of year, you might not have the resources available. Or conflict. If it involves an internal party, if it's your CEO, or like, for example, who's the car with the emissions? Was that Volkswagen? Okay, I keep wanting to say BMW, but I mean, would it have looked good for Volkswagen to be investigating themselves? Probably not. So that's when you want to bring in a third-party forensics. You may also want to bring in outside counsel to advise you. You may need to make notifications to your customers, your clients, your employees. You may also need to notify the media as well, depending on the nature of the incident. So these are all ongoing incident or ongoing activities. You'll also have your mitigation and remediation activities ongoing. And then, but then eventually you'll get to a point where you close the investigation and then you'll conduct your lessons learned. Does anybody have any questions about this? I know it's kind of hard to see. Yes?
I was making a mark on a lot of the outside sources. You may want your counsel to be the one who negotiates those contracts, not your sister, not your CIOs, or other vendor.
Exactly. What? One.
So you want to protect the privilege of your investigation. So at any point when you get to a point where you think you have a real incident, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, you know, counsel is going to be leading a lot of the direction on where this goes. They're going to have some responsibility for helping decide, you know, who is going to be involved in the breach notification, who's going to be involved, you know, in those decisions around, do you notify law enforcement, do you not, things of that nature. We see a lot, you know, around the insurance side, a lot more clients these days do have cyber policies. The insurance carriers now go a long way in terms of specifying what forensic company or one of several companies you can actually use to have an investigation conducted if you're going to file a claim under that policy. So that's important to kind of know up front. Maybe have a chance to build that relationship with that firm, go ahead and have agreements in place, things like that, so that if you do need to call them in, things progress very quickly and you don't get bogged down in paperwork and things like that.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the most important steps here is to have only one person talk to the media.
Yep.
And have that person designated beforehand.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We find that one of the teams that people tend to forget about when putting together their incident response team is media or public relations or communications. And they really need to be involved right from the beginning. Even if you don't end up needing to release a public statement, they can be working on it. And especially if it's something where you think the media might start calling you, they can have a holding statement prepared and be ready to respond. You know.
And also, some of our larger customers in those situations, send out communications to the internal teams that are involved, making sure that no one talks to the media. And there's things like that that you want to consider. A lot of times we see internal confidentiality agreements that are signed, even above and beyond maybe a standard employment agreement, but hey, if you're going to be read into a certain project or a certain incident, make absolutely sure you hold this at a certain level of confidence until all the decisions are made about how that gets publicized.
Yep. And they can also send out communications to your employees if it becomes public knowledge on how to respond on social media. Because you can tell your employees, hey, don't comment on Facebook, don't post anything on LinkedIn. But they're going to get inquiries from their friends, from their family, and so you want to make sure that they're helping you put out the message out there that you want the public to have, rather than just griping about it with their friends. Okay, so security levels, or severity levels. How do you establish a severity level for an incident?
Financial impact.
You don't. It's a trick question. One of the most common things that we see in somebody's incident response plan is they will want to establish a severity level 1, 2, 3, high, medium, low, whatever nomenclature they want to use. And we recommend that you don't do that, because if it's an incident, it's an incident. All hands on deck. You've got the team together. Everybody's working to mitigate. Everybody's working to remediate. And you're conducting the investigation. What ends up happening is if you establish a severity level, you might mislabel it, right? I think severity levels are very common with help desk triaging, which makes sense because if it's only impacting one user, it's probably not as big of a deal as if an entire department has a problem. But what if that one user that you're investigating, it's the CEO? What if there's some malware on his computer? One person, but it's the CEO. It's probably a bigger deal. And when you start your investigation, you don't know all the facts yet either, right? A lot of times we'll be brought in and there's like maybe 1 or 2 machines involved. And then we'll start investigating and it's like, oh look, now there's 3 or 4. The client that we were just with, we got up to what, 70? Yeah, we got up to 70 machines, but it took a few weeks to get to that point. So you may not know how big or how bad it's going to be, so don't worry about a label. If it's an incident, if it meets that definition, then you want to treat it as top priority, code red, whatever. Another thing you want to have as part of your plan is a roles and responsibilities definition. It should identify everybody who's on the team, all the IT resources, and all the non-IT resources. So your marketing and communications, HR should be part of it, because if there's an employee involved, you want to make sure you've got HR on the team so that they can help protect employees' rights. I was once working on an investigation where it ended up being an employee, but they identified the wrong employee to start with, and he was arrested. And actually, though, I think in that case, HR was the ones who were pushing for the arrest. But this was also in the UK, where for the police to question you, you have to be arrested. They can't just bring you in for questioning. So they wanted to talk to this young man because the company decided that he was the one who did it. And so they arrested him. And turns out they were way off base, which was really unfortunate. But, here in the U.S., we recommend that you have HR involved. So, you also want to outline the role of each member. So who can make those key decisions? So who can declare an incident? Who is responsible for working with, perhaps if you've got a team of forensic investigators involved, if you've got people who are doing analysis, you want to have somebody in charge of directing that work. That way everybody understands what their role is. And you can either define it as a single team, so anytime you have an incident, all of these people are involved, or it can be just a core team, and then you add ad hoc members as needed, because you may not need HR if there's no employee involvement. You may not need marketing or public relations, depending on the nature of the incident. So it's really what works best for you and your company. So here are some team members that we recommend that you consider. Definitely legal. Lawyers are our friends when investigating. Your CISO or your CIO. So you want to have a management resource, and you also want to have a technical resource. You're probably going to need some technical leads, so network, infrastructure, HR, PR and marketing, and then risk management / insurance, whoever handles that. So we recommend that your team consists of at least this. Know who is driving the bus. You know, we've been involved in investigations where it seems like nobody has ownership of anything, and it gets very chaotic, right?
Yeah, to say the least. I think that's probably one of the most key things. I mean, especially if you get to a larger intrusion, it's like you need somebody who has both the political capital and the knowledge to drive that investigation forward, to work closely with counsel, and make sure things are getting done. We run into situations a lot, we'll talk about this later, where maybe IT is kind of trying to drive the bus on something, and they don't really have a full understanding of the business implications of what they're dealing with. They may also slow themselves down based on sort of political considerations, where they think, oh, we can't really do this, or that'll be too impactful for the business, and we're not going to go make this change as part of containment. And so, in an incident, it's kind of a totally different ballgame. So you want to make sure you've got the right person that has the organizational authority to get things done. And that's probably one of the key factors that we run into.
One person that I don't have on this list that we recommend is that you have a project manager involved. Shameless plug for my profession here, but it's really helpful for us. I will go with the team when we have a large-scale investigation, and I will help coordinate deliverables, because we'll request that the client provide us with a lot of information, and logs and images, and we'll need to interview people and get background information about their different systems and how they work. And so I'll go on site with the team and help coordinate that. And I have found that when we walk into an investigation and they've got a project manager on their end, that makes things so much easier, because we've got that single point of contact who knows who to talk to. If we say we need these log files, they know where to get them. They can help us coordinate all of that so that we can just go with one person versus having to try and track down 20 people to get what we need. It's definitely not a must. If you don't have that type of person in your organization, it's fine, but it definitely helps make things go a little bit more smoothly. So communication. Your plan should also include a communication process flow and who owns communication. So, who is allowed to talk to the media? Who is allowed to communicate with your third-party vendors, your forensics, your counsel? Who sends out the communication to employees if it's necessary to do that? And then also, how do you set up secure communications for the team, right? Do you have a war room? Can you dedicate a conference room? A lot of times when we go on site, we try to be as unobtrusive as possible, and they'll put us up in a conference room, and we just kind of hang out there. And it's me and a bunch of guys in a conference room, which is always fun. Corporate email, is it safe to use that? Has your email been compromised?
Yeah, we see this a lot where corporate email systems may be either the focus of initial intrusion, or it's identified later that, oh yeah, the attacker has gotten into your email. And oftentimes, if you don't have two-factor authentication and sort of basic additional layers of security on your email system, it's going to be something we're really leery about using at the outset of the incident, as well as communications between ourselves. So we would recommend, in some cases, companies have separate out-of-band sort of encrypted systems, or we'll have everybody go set up their own sort of generic Gmail account or something that they use out-of-band for that communication. But even at that, we try to minimize written communication. All this kind of stuff, will come back around if that incident turns into something serious. Those emails, are going to be part and parcel to any litigation and other things that might go on. So, but something to think about. Kind of have that in your plan. What are you going to do in those situations? And like I mentioned, what are you writing down? If you're in IT and you're like, hey, this guy's calling, don't put that in an email. Go talk to somebody. It's a lot easier to convey that verbally and not have that come back to be misread later on.
Okay, and then just define who owns the communication with the external parties. Who's going to talk to counsel, insurance, law enforcement, regulators. A lot of times this will go through counsel, and that's what we recommend. Oh, and then who has to talk to the C-suite, right? A lot of times the CEO, CIO, they may not be there day to day with you, but they want that daily update. So you need to define what that update's going to look like, how often you do that. We recommend generally once a day. We'll try to schedule a status call once a day. The case we just got off of, we had a status call. We had a status call to get ready for the status call. So sometimes it's a little bit overkill, and all of that takes time away, right? Every time you have a status meeting, you've got to get it ready. You've got to prepare your update, and that can take away time from conducting the investigation. So you've got to be, yes?
One conference, the C74 thanks much told us, as a matter of fact, you have 2 pages in the response plan. They have one job, specific job of having individuals update their 15 minutes or each long everybody else's facts. Which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, and sometimes that's what you need to do is, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll send out a daily status report or I'll coordinate the daily call and try to run interference, because one thing that we found that can be very time consuming for us is when the CEO comes into the war room and wants to sit there and talk to us about the incident for an hour and a half.
We're going to have separate rooms for this. It's like, hey, you come here.
Yep.
All the analysts are over here.
Yeah. So it's, but yeah, you've got to have that plan, and certainly send out as soon as something urgent becomes known or important, definitely share it out, but don't have status reports just for the sake of having a status report. Contact lists. Your plan should also include an appendix with information about how to get a hold of anybody on the incident response team, not just office communication, but how to get a hold of them at home. So we recommend you include their desk phone, their cell phone, their home phone, a personal email if you can, so you can get a hold of them. And review it quarterly, because people leave. What? Twitter account, yeah. But review and update it quarterly. Like, I've looked at incident response plans where people, oh, yeah, he hasn't worked here in a year and a half, and, that's not going to do anybody any good. And we should also suggest that you critical vendor service provider. Oh, yeah. Did you put that in there, Mark and Lucie? But put in include some of your vendors that you work with that you might need to call. What are their emergency contact, and what's their emergency contact information if you need to get a hold of them in the evenings or on the weekends? And then we also suggest, if you have a 24/7 help desk, that you keep this list with the help desk. So if you get a call and you can't find somebody's phone number for whatever reason, if you're on your phone, you don't have the list, you can always call the help desk and get it and have them get in touch with somebody. Oh, yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Well, I think, one of the things that comes up when we see a lot, in responding to an incident is that the company show up, we get there, people don't have any idea a way to communicate to us or to their team. What are their applications? Where is their critical data exist in this organization? How is their network laid out? Where are your, what sources of audit information and, logs and other things do you have that we can use to investigate the incident? We spend a lot of time trying to just gather up this information. We get a lot of misinformation, we get wrong information, and it really can hurt the overall response, particularly containment efforts. If you're trying to figure out how to get your arms around it, stop the bleeding, and you're working from that or outdated information. So things like that are going to be key, and those are going to be the first questions any vendors bring in or any outside help are going to begin to ask you. So be prepared for that.
Mm-hmm. So the process, we looked at the process flow a little bit earlier. Make sure that you've got all the steps outlined in your process, starting with incident reporting and ending with lessons learned. Don't get bogged down with the internal status reports. And then clearly indicate when the team is convened. And make sure IT and security knows the plan, they're familiar with the plan, and that you don't delay. One of the things that we recommend with our clients in terms of declaring an incident, if they've gone 24 hours and they're still not sure if they have an incident, you know what? You probably have an incident. If you can't close the door on it and put it to bed, you've probably got an incident.
Yeah. About a year or so ago, I was brought in to basically be an expert witness for a government case that was looking at an incident response to a major intrusion that was out there. And one of the things that I found in my analysis, and again, going back to emails, going back to communications from like 6, 7, 8 years ago, the IT department and even some security folks knew they had an issue for weeks and months before they actually declared an incident, before they actually brought in senior enough people and said, wait a minute, guys, we've got a problem. They were trying to deal with it internally. They were trying to keep it quiet. And they had a plan that said, hey, this is what we do during an incident. They didn't do it. And so that became a big issue during the litigation. Of like, hey, kind of had this over here with your team. And the IT folks that were involved even said, well, we weren't really aware of the details of this plan. So we thought we were kind of doing this thing over here, but the reality was they hurt the business through that delay. So I think that's a really important thing, is making sure IT folks that are the most likely to discover something know how to get the right people involved and invoke that plan.
And then testing the plan. You want to review it at least quarterly and make any updates. And go ahead.
Go back to that last slide. So I think it's important to definitely pull that chain, right, when you think you've got an incident in place. But at the same instance, can't you hurt the business? Can't you hurt your operational staff if you're pulling that chain too often? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think in the case I'm referring to, there was.
What was that?
Yeah, I think that's where having the right person, whoever's kind of in charge, particularly from a technical side, that's got a clear, rational head. It's like, okay, yeah, we've got a problem here, or not, and I think the case that I'm thinking of, some sort of mid-level folks were noodling around, some system administrators and some analysts were like, looking at stuff for weeks and weeks that they kind of saw as unusual, but they never told their boss, essentially, who had oversight over the security and the IT sort of globally. So it just kind of sat. So yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a consideration, but I think, I would want to err on the side of over communicating than not. And we'll talk about the importance of some of that in the last section.
So review the plan quarterly, make updates. It can just be a quick 20-minute review. Make sure any contact information is updated. Did roles change? Because you may go through a restructuring. And then test the plan annually to identify any gaps. One of the things that we work with our clients is to conduct an annual tabletop exercise, and we'll create scenarios, walk them through the scenarios. And that's certainly something you can do yourself. Either bring in a professional to do it, or, sit down, take a half a day, and talk through, okay, something happened, what do we do? Does everybody know what their role is? Does everybody know who to contact? What if it happens on the weekend? Can we get a hold of people? Do we know how to reach people? So tabletop exercise. So it just helps you identify the gaps in the plan. It helps strengthen the communication between the stakeholders. Sometimes we work with customers who, when they come into the room to do the tabletop, is the first time they've met some of the people in the room. So a lot of times you've got, communications doesn't work with IT on a regular basis. HR doesn't always work with, security on a regular basis. So a lot of times that's the first time they're actually talking. And then it just helps you become familiar with all the key definitions, the process flow, the decision-making criteria. And then by talking through it on a regular basis, it'll help you adapt it, because cybersecurity is incredibly dynamic. It's changing all the time. And so you need to be able to take that framework that you have and know how to apply it almost intuitively. Okay, so this is where Mark is going to take over. And we'll talk about some day zero.
I just want to walk through, realize here, we just came out of this in the last few weeks at a major incident out on the West Coast, and it was kind of interesting because this particular organization has a fairly strong technical set of resources at their disposal as well, but we were brought in to assist. But you get called in on the first day, and what are the things that you're going to be thinking about? What are the things that we see over and over again when you walk into that room? Communication security plan. How are we going to start talking about this? So that may be something you're going to test off that IR plan. Do we use digital certificates? Do we have an outside, system that we can use? And we've seen time and time again, particularly on incidents that could end up having an insider component, person involved in it could be sitting right next to us. They could be overhearing what you're talking about. If you're scurrying about all over the place, you may be giving away that there's some awareness of something going on. So just be thinking about that. Find a good place to have those meetings where you're going to have those war rooms. It might be kind of out of the way, and just consider some of those factors. So, yeah, ensure counsel is present. Some of the best organizations I've worked with, we get on the phone, there's 10 or 12 people on the phone. If the right attorney is not on that meeting, we're just sitting there. We're not going to say a word. We want to protect privilege of that investigation. So if you bring us in on an incident, we're going to highly recommend that we're engaged with counsel. Anything you do, even internally, is done with counsel present, so that your organization can protect the information that's being exchanged from outside parties as much as possible. So, reporting the facts. So, especially if you're in IT, maybe your day job is just an IT administrator, you're in security, IR is not your life, but you're brought in because you've got some specific knowledge. Maybe you manage the firewalls, maybe you manage IDS, maybe you manage the application that we think is breached. Think about how you're going to communicate in those meetings. And so reporting the facts, I can't emphasize that enough. We find folks that come in and we start asking questions. Okay, what about, how's this application set up? Where do you have firewalls? What do you do here? What do you do there? And so often the folks that are put on the spot, essentially, to talk about that, if they don't know, they might make something up, or they'll provide an answer that's not, that's like they think is right, but they don't communicate that as, look, I think this is correct, but I'm not sure. Let me get back to you. So, talking about the resume creating situation, it's okay to not know. It's not okay to speculate without being very clear if you're speculating. The other thing is hysteria. We in a recent event that we've been dealing with, in a large intrusion, the client had brought in another forensics firm initially to investigate this incident, and they'd done some analysis and found some things. And essentially, they did discover that the domain controllers of this organization, the account database has essentially been taken. And their sort of comment to the business is like, everything's owned, everything's been breached, you guys are totally owned. It's like, what's the business going to do with that information, right? Like, that doesn't really help them solve a thing. It just generates hysteria. And so, that may be true. It may be true that all those accounts are taken, but that's not the question we're here to answer. In an investigation, we want to learn all the facts we can about what actually happened. If those credentials were taken, were they used? They might have been used. We see cases where actors get so far as to, zip up, compress up the sensitive data, the crown jewels, but they don't get a chance to exfiltrate. So we can say, okay, that guy owned your server, but he didn't get the data, and that's a big deal. So, again, just as you go and you're in those situations, be very mindful of speaking in terms of facts. So some of the things that, as you go through those initial meetings, what are the key questions that are going to come up, and both through counsel, as well as the investigative team and the business team. From a technical perspective, ultimately, we want to figure out, where did this incident start? Who is patient zero? If it's sort of an internal intrusion, where did that intrusion start from? If it's a web server breach, when did it happen? Which server did it happen on? What was exploited? From a timeline perspective, we want to get back to that initial beginning stages of the incident. And sometimes we may never know. It may have happened so long ago that there's just no record, the system no longer exists, things like that. But ultimately, these are kind of the things that we want to answer the questions to. Sometimes there's a question of lateral movement. Did the actor, we know the actor got on this particular system, but could they go anywhere else? Did they get anywhere else? And that's where those questions about your network architecture become really important. There may be an exchange of technical indicators. And back to your point, if someone in IT or security, sees something, they're going to come to the table with, okay, what do we know? Well, we saw a connection to this IP address or this domain, or we saw, a detection of this threat on this system, things of that nature. But be able to speak as intelligently as you can based on what you know about that incident. As mentioned, sometimes all we had a case a few months ago where, it started with the FBI showed up at their door and said, hey, is this your data? Yeah, we just saw it for sale, on an underground marketplace. And so then the scramble was like, wow, where did that data come from? And in this case, I think it was a healthcare organization. And they're like, man, that data could have been on this system or this system or this system, or, and so there was a huge process just to kind of figure that out. And we ran down some dead ends. We got some bad information along the way. And it probably delayed that process. The timing of most recent events, you're going to want to know how long ago did this happen, how recent has it been, and then what are the unknowns? Because there's going to be a lot of things that you don't know at the outset. And having an intelligent understanding of what do we really not know, and again, going back to the facts, is going to help determine, which way the investigation goes, what are the next steps that we want to take in getting to the bottom of the incident. So in those initial conversations, some just points there around how that discussion goes. A lot of times counsel is going to be leading some of that conversation because they've got a problem they need to solve, which is, hey, do we have something that's reportable? Do we have something that we've got to go notify on? How significant is this really? So they need good information to kind of determine those things. The business may be interested in, hey, I've got a lot of customers with contractual obligations. I need to know, is this particular data repository at risk? Because I may have to go let my customers know based on some contractual arrangement we have with them. And getting the answers quickly. What are the next steps we can do to narrow the scope of this and answer the problems as fast as we can? There's always going to be conversations about bringing in law enforcement, and we do some presentations just on that topic. And I'm sure many of you may have heard guys in the Bureau here in town locally or in your own jurisdiction that do a great job with networking and trying to build relationships with the community. Because there are times where you need their assistance. There are other times where you may want to take a step back and think about, is this something I need to notify? Because law enforcement really has a different objective with their police. So if they get involved, they want to identify who the actor is. They want to go prosecute somebody. They're not worried about, hey, you got a breach, I've got state notification requirements, I've got these legal requirements over here. That's really not their space to be in. So if you do bring them in, you want to make sure that you're coordinating that in such a way that it doesn't impair the other pieces of your investigation, while at the same time, if there is a good opportunity to attribute the attack to a certain person or group, then yeah, maybe we want to go after those folks and seek prosecution. Those are kind of two separate threads of the overall case. And so initially you may say, yeah, we're not quite ready to do that. But as you get further in the investigation, you may come back around and say, okay, now's a good time to bring them in and get them up to speed.
Mm-hmm. And just to add, too, on the evidence seizure, they may take evidence that you need to investigate. So I was talking, my direct boss actually used to work for the FBI, and he said we'd get evidence in, and sometimes it would sit with us for 3 to 6 months before we would get to it, because something more important would come in than your one computer. Yes?
It's very important to realize from the business's perspective, law enforcement doesn't care who the business drives.
Right. Exactly. They have their own agenda, and it is not necessarily the same as yours. Yep.
They stand on that for the same time frame. Sometimes you can get reprieves. So if you're, like we had a recent case where we were able to delay notification obligations because of the Bureau's involvement and the need to, we're actually trying to get attribution by working with them to identify the actor and sort of set up almost like a sting operation, if you will. And so we were able to forestall that notification process. But in terms of giving them evidence, I'm not going to give them anything unless I have a copy of it as well so that I can continue with my investigation and not impede that. So they can be really good friends. Definitely bring them in at times, but think about how that flow might work. And then you're going to talk about containment. Again, those early stages. You've got the investigative piece, trying to find out as much as we can know about the incident. But then we've also got the containment question. Like, okay, how do we bring this to closure? How do we stop the bleeding? And sometimes those kind of go in different directions. And depending on the nature of what's compromised, you may say, look, we see organizations, they identify an issue, they found an IP address, and it's like, okay, let's go block that IP. We're going to block that IP address. Hackers aren't going to be stymied by blocking a single IP address. You may just actually help the attacker learn that you're onto them because you suddenly blocked one IP address. So thinking about the containment process, what are the right steps? And often we don't want to go into a lot of technical containment until we really understand how this incident started. And sometimes there's pressures, if you've got active bleeding, somebody's in your core database and you see them exfiltrating data, yeah, okay, let's cut that off. Maybe we don't know everything just yet, but we need to stop that bleeding. But in other cases, we may say, hey, look, we kind of need to let this go for a while longer. Let's monitor that IP. Let's gather some more facts before we try to cut them off. And a good partner, who's not done a lot of this, can help you make those decisions, in the best interest of the business. Yeah, so we talked about that, some of the specific things early on. Oh man, we stopped this bleeding because we disabled this. We had access to Joe's account and we blocked it. It's probably not the only account that they have, they're just going to come back in. So, again, they're good things to think about. Allow everyone on the team a chance to speak. We run into this sometimes. There are folks sitting in that room, and you may be one of them, that has inside information, but if you're like me, kind of an introvert, I don't like speaking up, and disrupting things. And sometimes the chair of those meetings can railroad through stuff and don't give a chance for everyone on the team to share information about the incident. So one thing I like to do is kind of look at everybody and say, hey, do you have anything else you want to add? Do you have questions? Do you have comments? Because you're going to need the input from everybody when you're in those trenches. We're talking about scheduling. We kind of covered this earlier. Particularly, you're meeting 1 or 2 times a day. Is this an all-night, all-hands on deck night, and weekend kind of thing? Kind of understand that, and you're kind of continuing to iterate through those processes until the incident is resolved.
And then lessons learned. One thing I just want to touch on, as a project manager, I love doing lessons learned because I like to close things up and tie a little bow around it. But you really want to be careful when you document your lessons learned after an incident, because if the incident was a direct result of something you should have done and you didn't, or something that you knew about and you didn't address right away, you might not want to put that in writing. Or if you do document your lessons learned, do it at the direction of counsel, and counsel has the only copy of those lessons learned. So, because you don't want, in case that it's a big investigation or it gets a lot of attention or becomes public knowledge and there's litigation, you don't want somebody to have a document outlining exactly what you did wrong and that you knew that you were doing wrong. So.
I've also seen cases where the lessons learned covered things that needed to have been done that had been talked about for a long time, and then just had not gotten off the ground. It's like, oh, this is a lesson learned. No, actually, you really knew about this 3 years ago, and you didn't implement that system or that control.
So thank you. We really enjoyed being here today. We're definitely willing to answer any questions you have. Our contact info is here. I'm happy to give you one of my cards. I'll gladly email the slides out to anybody who wants them. I don't know if there's a plan for distributing them through BSides or not, but if you want the slides, come see me and I'll give you my card and I'll be happy to send them out to you. Yes?
A couple of points that you made. One was not relying on checklists, the other was knowing the plan by heart. I understand how poorly defined checklists can throttle or short-circuit a process, cause you to fail. But also, I don't believe most organizations can rely on their staff knowing the plan by heart, and well-structured, rather open checklists that prevent you from missing something seem like a good idea.
I think for me the key in that statement is really knowing that you have a plan and knowing the key folks that might be brought in, know that there's this resource over here, that we've thought about it. And we actually dealt with a large breach in an organization last year that had gone through a planning process with us about a year or so before that, and gone through the tabletops and stuff. And throughout, they were commenting on how, wow, and they had their act together. And they said a number of times, like, look, we remember when we went through this exercise a year and a half ago, and how much that helped them think through and make sure the right people are at the table. And I think that's the key thing. Yeah. What you don't want to do is create that plan just in a vacuum in IT and stick it over in a corner on a file server. Yeah. If you don't then use it, then you've actually created a liability for yourself down the road. So.
And it's really about understanding the communication points and knowing if we suspect something is going on, who is that person that makes that decision? Who do we need to notify, that incident response team lead? What we find, we'll come into organizations and we'll start talking to them and they'll say, well, we don't have an incident response plan. But when we start talking to them, we ask them, well, if you saw something suspicious, what would you do? A lot of them do have an institutionalized process, or they have that knowledge already in place. It's just very informal. It's not documented. And so we just help them get it down on paper so that it's got a more formal structure around it. But it's really about understanding that communication and how to get a hold of people and who to talk to. Yes?
Do you have any experience specifically with, for example, state educational institutions or other unionized environments where it's kind of a distorted responsibility picture?
Yeah, we work with one university that's pretty large that has a lot of very decentralized, and it's a challenge because a lot of times their security team doesn't necessarily know what's going on in all of these different departments. And so it's definitely an ongoing communication. And what they're really working to do is understand where all the important data is, like their research data, so they know what needs to be protected, and it helps them determine what's truly at risk if something's discovered.
Do you employ such strategic approach, for example, like the more seniority person has in the United States, the less risky items they are entitled to have on the network?
That'd be nice.
Like, for example, sanitizing Excel from possible scripts embedded or things
Yeah.
We definitely work with organizations that do additional sort of security controls around their C-suite systems, their high-value targets, and they do additional sort of targeted monitoring of the systems for activity. And I think maybe that's what you're part of your referring to. Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you all for being here today. Appreciate it.